Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to a special podcast here on Four Lads in the Dream. My name's Stevie Clifford. I'm your host today, and I am joined by Andy McKellar. Andy, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, mate. Yeah, I hope this is the only sort of negativity we have today, given we're recording on Wednesday afternoon and the team got up to Pittodrie tonight.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Big game on the field for Rangers this evening. We might touch on that at the end, but this is all about yesterday. The accounts were released. It doesn't make for good reading. We're going to go through it all. Andy is an accountant for small businesses. He has his own kind of experience in that field. I do not. So this is an opportunity for us to ask Andy some questions and kind of maybe get Andy to explain it a wee bit better for us all. Andy, let's just start from the real highlights of yesterday's accounts, and if you could run through a kind of some of the figure eye-catching kind of moments from the accounts.
Yeah, so if we start in the sort of profit and loss account, and that's the one that will grab the headlines. At the top of that is the figure the club will probably want you to focus on. It's the record turnover of 88.3 million, which is a £4.5 million increase on the previous year. So that's been driven by gate receipts, hospitality and commercial. So that's all good news for FFP, brings the club in more money, and I think that's probably the highlight as far as the club goes for this. As we start moving down, you'll probably find we start to get into some of the negatives and some of the bits that maybe not as keen for people to pick up on. Moving further down, one of the other things that's good news in a sense is that costs have only gone up by 1%. We're obviously in a high inflation environment at the moment, so costs are up to 96.2 million. But within that, the first team costs have reduced by 2.5. So that's the first team wage bill in this year, being last season, has dropped by 2.5 million. And that's kind of the first step that we're going to see going forward of the cost reduction in there. Because the accounts have told us that will be a further £6 million reduction in the current season, which is pretty enormous when you add to the reduction already seen last season. Now, one of the other slight highlights in the accounts, in a sense, is that the club received a business insurance payout for the COVID season of 3.9 million. So that added to the record turnover, gave us quite a lot of money to play with this season. As we move down again, we've got the amortisation of 10.1 million, which is basically the players' contracts being written down over the course. So that's the kind of transfer cost being written into the P&L every season. But within that figure, in addition to that figure, there was 2.9 million of impairments, which is basically the club saying we've signed a player for X many millions, but we don't think he's worth that, or we're not going to be able to do it. So it's like a negative charge because basically on bad transfers. So bad transfers is something I think we'll touch on as we go through these accounts. It's a bit of a theme, and it sort of plays into the position the club finds itself in overall. We did make a profit on the sale of the Albion car park of 1.1 million. So again, that's more money that the club's brought in to play with this season, which is, as we'll find out when we get down, is something we badly needed. So all of that coming in with the profit and player sales of 5.6 million. That's primarily Glenn Kamara and Fashion Sakala being sold last summer. That left us with an operating loss of just under 10 million before the sort of one-off expenses occurred. This is where it maybe gets a bit nasty, and this is the stuff that the club won't be so popular with. There was a non-recurring cost of 3.4 million charged into the profit and loss account. This relates to the settlement we reached with Elite. That was the retail partner that we had that went to court, and we settled with them. So the total settlement was actually 3.8 million, and that will be paid up until September 2029. If we add that to the Sports Direct costs that we saw last year, it's eye-watering figures, and maybe a bit of a Dave King legacy there. You know, some of the problems that were left behind as a result of the retail stuff that he primarily dealt with. And all of that brings us right down to the sort of eye-watering sum that I think most of the papers will pick up, most of the fans will talk about, is the net loss of 17.2 million, and that's pretty enormous. If we go back to the COVID season, 2021, we lost 24 million, but that was with us losing 17 or 18 million pounds in revenues from, ticket sales and having the stadium empty. So to lose 17.2 million on a club record revenue is pretty enormous. You want to jump in, Stevie, or will I keep going?
It doesn't really make for enjoyable listening, but we have to do this. I suppose this is where I'd probably ask you to explain the kind of lows of the accounts, but you're kind of doing that as we're ongoing. So carry on, I think, is the best way to do it.
Right, so that's the profit and loss account. So that takes us down to the sum that we've lost in the season. That's the big sum. That'll be the big headline. If you look briefly at the balance sheet, the first thing you come across on there is basically the intangible assets. That's the players, that's the squad. And this figure was known last year from the previous accounts, but it's confirmed in these ones that we spent £21 million on incoming players last season. So that's the likes of Cyril Dessers, Sam Lammers, Danilo. And that's a pretty huge expense for us, even accounting for the revenues and everything, 21 million. And in truth, if we rewind and actually think about what that got us on the pitch last season, it was a bit of a mess. We ended up sacking the manager nice and early, and some of those players have been moved on, some have barely contributed. So, yeah, 21 million. The next thing is the cash balance. We hear a lot of from across the city, but I don't think it's something we'll be shouting about because the cash balance is down to 1.7 million from 5.3 the year before. Now, there's a lot of season ticket money to come in, which obviously isn't included there. It's instalments, it's those sort of things. So there's a lot of money still to come in, but it doesn't leave us with a lot of money to play with on a sort of ongoing basis. I don't envy James Taylor and his job and trying to just keep the money rolling in. One of the concerns I think the balance sheet flags up, and we touched on it earlier, is the recruitment, the sort of players in, players out. At the end of June 24, so the end of last season, we had transfer fees due in, so that's instalments for previous sales of 11.5 million, but we owed transfer fees out of 23.1 million. So that's a 13.2 million pound negative movement on the previous year. So what we're seeing is that every year we're doing net spend, and all that's happening is it's going to squeeze the budget and cost us money effectively unless we can start selling players and making profits again. John Bennett's spoken about the mythical trading model. What we're seeing in the accounts just now is what happens when that isn't up and running. If you're only buying all the time and not selling, you're basically costing the business money and putting pressure on cash flow, which is one of the big problems that we're going to face as we go into this season and beyond. So we lost 17 million. How did we fund it? That's us onto directors' loans. So the total loans due to directors in the year is 22.3 million. That's nearly a £9 million increase on the previous year. Within that, John Bennett's owned just under 11.5. Julian Walhart and John Halstead put in 10 million. And there's a historic loan of just under £1 million due to Julian Walhart as well. So that's a lot of money a lot of money to take in the season. And I think I'd said on Twitter, on X previously, that was the likely scenario. There's no way we could spend the way we did and not reduce the cost quickly enough without having to either have extra borrowing or equity injection put in to fund it. The only slight positive for the club is that the interest rate being charged in these loans has dropped to 4% from 6%, which is a lot better than we would get in the open market. So that's kind of the balance sheet done. That's kind of the top figures from the accounts. There's a little note at the end of the accounts, which is post-balance sheet events. This got a bit of attention on Twitter. It confirms that we spent 13.4 million on new players. I don't think that's a huge surprise with some of the guys we bought in the summer. But worryingly, it says that we received only 0.8 million, so 800k for the players that we sold after 30th of June 24, which includes Sam Lammers, Todd Cantwell, Connor Goldston. And there's a bit of disbelief about that on Twitter, but that's what it says in black and white, is that that's what we got for these guys. So is it a case that no other club would take them with their wages, so the transfer fees were basically written off so that they would leave? Might be a good question for the AGM, that one.
This is where the club, Andy, are a bit clever, aren't they? Because Rangers will allow this to go out as Sam Lammers will leave in a £2.5 million deal. What they really mean is Sam Lammers' wages at 25 grand a week, just doing some quick calculator here, 25 grand a week. You know what I mean? In a course of a year is 1.3 million. So if he's got 2 years left in his contract, you're saving 2.5 million. So Rangers will then be, I wouldn't say they will not correct you if you report it as a £2.5 million deal for Rangers, because effectively they are saving £2.5 million when the reality, Andy, is that for the likes of the Goldsons, and you touched upon the wages going down £6 million this year, which is massive. Considering we had another 11 players coming in, is a huge amount when you really consider everybody that's left. And we spoke a lot about earlier. I remember Shona got a lot of stick for saying that the wages saved this year will be in the region of 10, 11 million pounds. Well, she's actually pretty much close to the total figure it would have been without all those players coming in. So I don't think that was a bad kind of guesstimate as we had at the time. But that is how Rangers will. I think it's being cute. Is that fair? When how they'll kind of not portray it, but they'll allow it to be portrayed. Because being a wee bit inside, Rangers don't say to you people have been sold for 2.5 million, etc. Somebody will mention it somewhere and it snowballs, and that's how it goes. Do you think that's a case of them being a little bit inventive?
I'm sure they'll say they had nothing to do with it and it was just a paper making up figures. But no, I mean, there does appear to be a significant discrepancy between most of the media reports and what the accountants are saying. I hope there's a decimal point in the wrong place there, because that would seem a bit more attractive to us, now, 8 million rather than 0.8. But if that is the case, and that's what kind of feeds through into the accounts next year, it'll impact the P&L, because we'll have made losses on the likes of Lammers, for example. But it's not, even more importantly, it's not a lot of money to be bringing in when you're paying out, again, 13 plus million on guys that are coming in. We're doing things like obligations to buy to kick things into the next financial year. So I think regardless of the reporting, the key thing is, the reality of it. It's good to get guys off the wage bill, but it shows you the mess they made, not just with the transfers, but paying these guys money they just won't get elsewhere. That seems to be the case, that guys like maybe Todd Cantwell have been allowed to go down the road for next to nothing. Your pal Scott Wright, well, he might have been one of the ones that have just been kind of let go on the basis that we'll lose his wages, somebody else will take it on. So that kind of has to stop, and I'm sure that will be one of the things Niles Coppin will be charged with. It'll be something that whoever the chief executive and the chairman is, that will have a really close eye on it, because we cannot continue to lose the level of money we're losing. We cannot continue to have net transfer fees going out the way. I think at the very least we need to get to the point where we're breaking even season on season. So we're trying to sell maybe 10, 12 million pounds worth of players to basically fund reinvestment and just keep that going. Because if we don't find a way to sell these guys, we're just digging ourselves into a deeper hole. There's only so far we can cut the wage bill to allow for this year-on-year spend. And if we've reduced it £6 million in this year, I don't think there's much further you can go.
Yeah. I was going to ask you to kind of explain the £17 million loss, but I think you've effectively done that. My question then to you, Andy, is that in next year's accounts, they don't suddenly become better, in the sense of, first of all, you've got a £5 million downfall from the Kiev knockout, basically, because you're losing that prize money and the income, and then you've got costs of the Copeland and things like that. And then that's before we've even written guys like Cortez in. It's been a £4 million transfer. Now I realise we won't pay that in one go and things like that. But what I'm trying to say is, and I suppose the biggest question on Rangers fans' lips is that, how do we fix this? How do we stop these eye-watering losses every year upon year? Because it doesn't seem to me like there's an automatic fix here that suddenly goes, short of a Champions League qualification, which then does fix everything. But as you and I both know, and being realistic, isn't likely from a Champions winning situation this year. I'd say it's very unlikely. Coming from qualification in second is also unlikely at this very moment. So it's nothing's really a given. is it? There's no pot of gold anywhere to fix this. That's my overall point, I think.
No, there isn't. And I think last season we missed out on the pot of gold. We were sitting top of the league in February, March time. If we'd have won that league and qualified for the Champions League with all the additional money that comes with that, that might have just put a positive spin in these accounts and given us a bit of hope going into the new season that suddenly we'd have even larger revenues and we'd have more money to bring in players to improve the squad, and players that we've got would have a better platform for us to basically go and sell them, put them in the shop window. But without that, as you say, there's no quick fix. If we sort of use this year as a baseline, okay, we don't have the one-off costs to the likes of Elite. They won't appear next year. But we also don't have the one-off income of the insurance payout. So they both kind of cancel themselves out. On the revenue side, as you said, at the moment, we're €5 million down because of the Kiev game. So we need to try and make that up some way. Revenues might increase steadily again, but again, it leaves us some money to find just to kind of stand still. And the only way, really, as you said, short of winning the league this year, which seems unlikely, and starting to improve the finances and making it more likely that we'll win the league going forward, is player trading. It's the one thing that's held us back. We've had, I think, under Gio and then under Beale, we've had 2 seasons where we've spent a lot of money badly. So the squad has got worse, but we've also weakened the balance sheet, weakened the accounts, because we're spending all this money, but it's on players that we can't actually get a return for. You've seen that with Ben Davies, he's away out on loan. You've seen it with guys like Matondo that are still sitting there, Yilmaz, not contributing. Ideally, these are guys we would sell even on a break-even or basically a slight loss, just to get them out the door off the wage bill and get some money in that we can then reinvest. Because we kind of had this before with Roof and Hollander. If we've got guys sitting there hoovering up wages and we spent money on them, they're not contributing, that's just no good to us. And we've had too much of that over the last couple of years. There's been a slight change this year with Niles Coppin coming in, and the manager obviously kind of aligned to the strategy that they've got of targeting young players and certain profiles. But I'm not looking at the squad just now and thinking we've got 2 or 3 £10 million players in there we can just flog off in the summer and suddenly that kickstarts everything. So I don't think there's a quick fix to this. I think this is going to be 2 or 3 seasons where we hopefully see improvements that can just strengthen our position. Because we're already seeing in these accounts that we're needing equity injections, we're needing further debt taken on in the current season, and that will just continue unless we start selling players. Basically, we need to bring in money on the guys we're investing in.
So I think as we kind of come to the end of this rather cheery podcast, Andy, I suppose the biggest question for me, or at this moment in juncture, is that how do we raise that money? It's obviously going to have to come from investors. John Gilligan said that was going to happen. So it's current investors that are going to basically have to pony up. I think it's something just short of £9 million for us to get to the end of the season. But my biggest issue with that, Andy, is that that's £9 million just to stand still, just to get to an end of a season, just to coexist. Where's the additional money that's going to come in to allow this club to stabilise, to normalise? How do they get that? How do they get there? How do we stop the accounts every year being one of those things where you take a wee peek, under to see what's really going on? And that's how I feel about it at the moment. This is just because of such a level of mismanagement. These guys in the boardroom are having to cover their own mistakes year upon year upon year, but it's not actually benefiting Rangers Football Club in any way other than allowing us to plug holes. And that's my biggest concern.
That's the question, I think, that'll be their question, is how do they change it around? Because you said, if we go back a wee while, we won the league, reached the European final and had record player sales. That was the point, really, that we should have reached or get very, very close to self-sustainability. We shouldn't have needed to go back every year, as we do now, and say we need another 10 million just to see out the season and keep the lights on, because we can't sell anybody. We've not got players that are worthy of decent fees. But that's what we're seeing. And in some of the cases, we've been charged interest for the privilege. So they're making mistakes, the Copeland being one of them as well. That will be an expensive less than I think in the current year, and the club are taking in loans, they're paying interest on the loans, and that doesn't seem to end. There doesn't seem to be an end of that now. We kind of got to the point maybe a year or two ago where we just kind of needed some debt from John Bennett just to kind of keep the money in the bank, keep the cash flow ticking over. But we've since dug ourselves in deeper with some poor spending decisions, having to sack managers, and then the expense in the summer of Hampden and the Copeland and all these sort of things. So in terms of where does it end, I don't know. It'd be a good question for the AGM to ask one of the guys, John Gilligan or James Taylor, whoever's answering it, when do they see this club being self-sustainable? Because we were told by Stuart Robertson not that long ago that we were on the cusp of it. You know, we're on the verge of sustainability. We seem further away than ever now, that given the sums involved are larger, given the amount invested in the squad is larger, and given the wage bill's larger, it seems harder and harder to move that towards sustainability. As you said, without Champions League riches or something like that, it's going to take a fair bit of work and a bit of magic maybe in the recruitment front just to get a few guys in that just hit the ground running and that we can sell for a profit, because that's what we need to do. That's the kind of club we are.
Andy, how do I word this? Does this board need to sell up for Rangers to go and do anything? People want change and understand why they are, year upon year failures. But does a takeover suddenly fix this? Because the way that you're talking and the way that I read the accounts, and folks, I'm not an expert, so it's limited. The wage bills come down £6 million, and Andy, that's going to need to come down another £5 million just for us to start being towards a level of sustainability. And that means a few more big hitters going out the door, and that means probably downsizing the squad and taking risks on guys like Jeffy and hoping that they become something that we can then move on. Anybody thinking sack the manager, that's not happening, because that'll cost in the region of just, I guess, £5 million that we really don't have. So we're kind of stuck in the moment of praying that this works somehow with very limited strategy into how we're doing it. That's how I feel. Is that fair?
The problem I think this board have had over the years is that they've maybe tried to dip their fingers in themselves. They've not empowered guys or appointed guys to go and run the club for them. We had Stuart Robertson for a period of time. We appointed James Bisgrove, we promoted him. And to be honest, I don't know why they don't go out, pay decent money, and get an experienced CEO in the door to run it on their behalf. They can sit back and let the guy get to work, because what we're seeing is probably an over-promotion of some people, or the appointment of people who don't have experience doing the role that we're bringing them in to do. I don't know why they haven't valued spending money at the top end of the club, because money spent well at the top end of the club can be worth tenfold at the bottom if you've got guys making the right decisions, or maybe even more to the point, not making the mistakes that we've seen over the last couple of years. Does a takeover fix it? Depends who's coming in. You might get somebody that's going to come in, inject a bit of money, having run a football club before, appoint the right people, and suddenly you're improving, you're on that sort of upward trend all the time. Equally, you might appoint somebody, might come in, take over, and they make the same mistakes. I don't know how likely a takeover is, given the sums involved. You look at the amount that's owed to the current shareholders, that would have to be repaid for a start before you even buy their shares. But I think, to stay away from the hypotheticals, if we look at where we are now, the current guys have to get an experienced executive team in there, suitable to the level of our club, and let them run it, give them the backing to run it, and give them the space to do it their way, and basically take it out of their hands, because they've shown that they can do it. John Bennett, for example, might be a really experienced business guy, but his time as chairman wasn't great. And it's time maybe that these guys just took a step back, appointed the right executive team to do it on their behalf. And listen, that might cost you a bit of money at the top end. You're not paying Stuart Robertson 300, 400k. You might be paying double that to get somebody in that's worthy of the job. But the benefit to that, if you get it right, will be a lot more than the salary you're paying them, because it's costing us millions upon millions every year now, because of basic mistakes, be it in transfers or projects and all these sort of things. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
So, in a nutshell, can we expect the downsizing of this club to continue in order to squeeze the losses out of the club, basically, is what I'm trying to get at? Because it seems to me like they're going to have to continue to cut that wage bill to make this sustainable.
If you remember last year's AGM, John Bennett told us to keep an eye on one figure, and it was the operating loss before player trading, which stood at 10 million. He said that wasn't sustainable. We couldn't do that going forward, and so, if we're going to cut costs, that figure in the accounts that we've just seen last season was only 2 million, but that includes the COVID insurance loan. So if we add that back on the basis we're not going to get it back, you're talking £6 million. But as you've just said, we've reduced the wage bill by 6. So as we go forward, we might not be a million miles away from breaking even pre-player trading with the revenues that we've got in and with the reductions we've made to the squad. That, I think, is a fairly healthy place to be. But then what it does mean is everything then is reliant on the player trading, because if we're break even pre-player trading, we cannot continue to lose money on the player trading. We can't continue to have net spends and we're paying out more than we're getting in, because that's the part then that's going to either create the loss or create the profit. So I think for us, that's what it's going to come down to, really. I think we've cut the costs quite significantly, and there's only so far you can do that before it starts really impacting the product on the park. I'm sure the guys could, over a year or two, cut a further 10 million for the wage bill if they wanted, but what do you end up with for that? What kind of players are you bringing in on 10 grand a week, for example? So I think we're getting towards a healthy baseline pre-player trading where we can say, yeah, quite happy with the cost, quite happy with the income, assuming, of course, we qualify for Europe, because that's the big one. But the player trading is the bit that's then going to give you the profit and loss. It's the reason Celtic have done so well over the years, is that they haven't always had big profits before they've sold players, but every year, every few years, they've had big sales that have given them the profits, given them the money in the bank, and they're almost on the opposite side of us. They've got money coming in, whereas we're paying out in the other end, and that's why, as I say, cash has been squeezed, debt is increasing, and that's just going to keep putting pressure on until we reverse the trend, which, as I said, I think it comes down to player trading now. I think we've done the hard yards in terms of the squad costs. So everything then is going to come down to, have we signed guys that are good enough to, one, deliver success, and two, be sold for a decent fee? Because that's the thing we just haven't done over the last couple of years.
Well, let's hope that Yefty can somehow morph into Roberto Carlos and Connor Barron can continue his upward trend, because these are what we're going to rely on. I think we need to normalise as well selling players for £2-3 million, which, to give Sam Lammers away after such a good season in Holland, is unthinkable. To push Connor Goldson out the door to replace him with a complete downsize at a cost, again, pushing Todd Cantwell out the door, the decision to make it so obvious that he wasn't wanted after Birmingham. There's questions like that are going to bring anger from the support that yeah, we needed, or we've basically pushed them out the door to save wages. Yeah, I get it, but how clever is it in terms of what we've brought in? And all questions. I think people, as we approach AGM, I think one final thing I would say is, don't waste your questions. There's so many pertinent questions to be asked of this board. 2 or 3 we've highlighted here on this podcast regarding the running of this football club. Make sure you leave your questions about getting parked at the Albion and getting hot food to the side. Get the proper questions in and hold this board to account of how they're running this football club. And I think that's vital for everyone. Andy, thank you for your time. I would love to have said it was a lovely catch-up. It always is with you, my friend, but that was fairly grim reading and listening.
Yeah, sorry we're not discussing something much happier, like a nice win tonight or something like that, but it's one of those ones. The figures are what they are. If you're losing £17 million, I don't think we're going to come on here and paint it as sunshine and roses just for the sake of it, are we? So, yeah, it kind of tells us where the club is at the moment, and it's not a surprise to MD. We're not looking at this and being absolutely shocked that we're not cash rich and sitting with an amazing squad and everything's hunky-dory. So, no, sorry it's not been more cheerful, and I hope we have something more to talk about later tonight that's a bit better.
Yeah, Donald Trump was busy tweeting Red Van Loyal and things yesterday on X. Maybe he'll step in, and after he's made America great again, make Rangers great again. That would be quite the something. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Good luck to the team and the manager tonight up at Pittodrie. Andy, thanks for your time. And we'll see you again soon on Four Lads Podcast.
Four Lads Podcast is sponsored by Rhino Express, Clyde Joinery, Athol Industrial Solutions Limited, and CSD Air Conditioning, along with Art of Gold. Thank you for listening or watching the podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.